I grabbed one, took my time pulling it over my neck, then brought the straps around and tied them up front. I found a pad and paper and a pen and walked back out. I didn't go to Granite Mountain Table. Too predictable. Instead, I spotted an elderly couple who'd just been seated and were studying menus. "Good morning. My name is Brendan, and I'll be your server today. Can I get you started with some juice or something?" The woman looked me up and down. "I've never seen you before. When did you start here?" I could hear the guys behind me cracking up. I told her this was my second day, and I took their order. Then I went to our table and played it cool, asking the guys what they wanted. Eric was shaking his head. When I was done, I handed my notes to the waitress. She was a cute, dirty, blonde-haired girl with great legs. When she asked who we were, someone told her we were firefighters. Before we left, the waitress wrote her number on a piece of paper and dropped it on our table. When we went back to IHOP the next morning, I left her the number for Chris's room, returning the favor and all. We were flying everywhere: Colorado, New Mexico, Idaho, Minnesota. The West was so dry that Granite Mountain barely had time to rest between jobs. Early that season, after another 2-week roll or mission, I came home exhausted. I was lying on my couch in my apartment when Natalie called me. "Brendan, we have a problem." I sat up straight. "What's wrong? Is Michaela all right?" "She's fine." Her voice sounded tense. "I mean, she's not fine. That's the point. She doesn't want to eat." I was dumbfounded. I'd never heard of a child who didn't want to eat. "What?" "She misses you. She thinks that when you go away, you're never coming back. We have to deal with this." I knew Michaela hated to see me go. Having a hot shot for a dad or mom is tough for a kid. You never know when your parent is going to disappear. We might be in the station and get a call to go to New Mexico or Idaho or Montana, and we'd get in the buggies and scoot. A quick call home, tears on the phone, and then we'd be out of touch for 2 weeks. Couldn't even call home. There's no cell phone signal in the middle of the national forest. I tried to take it all in. She's not eating? I took her to the doctor. He says she's suffering from separation anxiety and might be depressed. That word was a sharp dagger. Depression. My mom had experienced it, and so had I. But 1-year-old girls shouldn't get depressed. It brought me back to that time I was 12 years old, crying my heart out in the driveway of my grandfather's house after my mom had gone to Oregon. At every stage, I seemed to see my life being repeated over in Michaela's, and each time I had to fight to stop it from happening, to find a new way out for her. I began to realize that eventually I'd have to take a job, begin fighting structure fires so that I could have regular hours and see my daughter more often. I was also going through a custody fight for Michaela, and I knew that if I didn't have a 9 to 5, I'd barely see her. Later on, I talked to Jesse, and he took me to see Eric. I repeated the story to Eric and told him that I needed to look at the structure side. At one point, I was explaining that Michaela had stopped eating when I left. I started crying. Second time I'd cried in front of the man. Damn. But the thought that I was causing my daughter so much pain was hard to take. Eric didn't want to lose guys. If he liked you, he wanted to keep you on Granite Mountain. I was worried about that. But he surprised me. "Listen, Brendan, whatever you need to do for your daughter, you go ahead and do that. I support you fully. You got that?" I nodded, unable to speak. I had never had that from a man. That unconditional support, that love, it meant a lot to me. The three of us talked about when I would start moving over to the structure side. Eric made it clear that it was up to me. When I was ready, he'd make some calls and try to get me started with Prescott Fire. Meanwhile, I was still part of his hot shots. Until that moment, maybe I didn't really believe that Granite Mountain was 100% real. I'd met many people in my life who talked about having your back when it counted, but few of them had come through for me. The drug business is not the best place to learn about loyalty. Eric needed bodies for the line, but he needed me to be a good father more. I cried because I knew all those words Eric had used. Integrity, love, weren't just words to him. He meant to stand by them, to live them out. Granite Mountain had become my substitute family. Chapter 21. The Dose Fire kicked off on June 18, 2013. It ran fast and hot. It was unstoppable, eventually burning upward of 11 square miles of terrain. Some guys made a joke that it was eating the brush like hungry hippos, and it was threatening Prescott, our home. This was the fire where Chris and I nearly got caught by the firewall. We touched our drip torches into the flames and barely made it out alive. We fought the fire for 3 days, and most of the time it straight up kicked our asses. It would slope over the containment lines, break our backs, jump our brakes. On the third day, as we were headed back from the fire line, the situation went from depressing to ridiculous, or so I thought. We'd been asked to save the juniper tree, Jesse told us. We were tired, our eyes red from constant smoke. "A juniper tree?" I asked. "What the fuck for? There's billions of them here." "Not like this one," Jesse said. "It's the world's largest alligator juniper, and it's right in our backyard. It's like a national treasure, okay? Tomorrow we're going to go in there and assess and see if we can save it." That piqued my interest. I jumped on the internet and started looking up this bad boy. I found one story about this guy who made a pilgrimage and came to Prescott to find this amazing tree. He asked around, but there were no maps or coordinates to tell the visitor where to look. Finally, he stumbled on a local who knew where it was and agreed to take him there. Together, they hiked out to the spot and found the tree and took pictures. The man was overjoyed. The next day, we parked the buggies and hiked in. The tree was about 1.5 miles from the trailhead. When we found it, it was big and beautiful, a thick-trunked old boy with low, spreading branches. I wondered how many of the junipers in this area had spawned. It was like being in the Garden of Eden, Southwest style, with the original juniper. We got our saws out and began cutting brush and digging line around the tree until we had a nice containment zone. Now we needed to burn it out so that any wildfire approaching the place wouldn't be able to burn through. Andrew and Dustin Defford got the job, and we could see the smoke rising as they lit the fire. We worked all day until darkness had fallen, then jumped into the buggies and headed to the Red Robin for dinner. We were all chowing down on our hamburgers when a guy from Prescott Fire walked over. He asked us what we'd been working on that day, and we looked at each other a little sheepishly. Actually, we were saving the world's oldest alligator juniper, Jesse said. Are you serious? The guy answered. I asked my wife to marry me under that thing. This juniper was sacred to people. We'd spent our careers destroying juniper. It was like the #1 fuel in the Southwest. We followed the reports trickling in from the field that night. We knew the fire was blitzing the hills near the oldest tree, and we were downhearted. Too much was going on to survive a wildfire on parched high desert. The next morning we woke up worried about the damn thing. Is the tree okay? Did it make it through the night? We felt a sense of ownership now, and as the rest of the crew headed off to work, Jesse hiked into the tree to see if this thing was still standing. Granite Mountain? We heard Jesse on the radio at about 10 a.m. Go ahead. She's standing all right, just one big branch burning from an ember. I dug it out and everything's cool now. After that, the juniper became like a tailspin for us. The next day, my squad hiked out there to eat lunch next to it. It threw a lot of shade, and we sat under it and ate our packed lunches. Don't ask me how, but we got on the subject of Job from the Bible. Maybe the antiquity of the tree, everything it had seen, got us thinking on deeper things. Maybe someone in the crew was talking about how nothing was going right for them, how they felt like Job, facing one calamity after another. There were a bunch of Christians on that squad. I was a believer, someone who tried to follow Jesus as best as I could. Clayton, Dustin, and Wade Parker were all men of faith. So the discussion went around and around about Job and what he meant. What would you do if you lost everything? I said to Wade. I'd trust in God, he said. What if you lost your family? All of them. I mean everything, Wade. So do I. I looked at Wade to see if he was fucking with me, but his face was calm. He gave answers without a moment's hesitation. I was so struck by that. Wade and the boys were ready for any disaster, for any loss, no matter how painful, because they had something bigger behind them, their love for God. That idea of giving up everything to the Lord and doing it easily with a glad heart just floored me. I vowed to that day to be a better Christian, to be more like Clayton and Dustin and Wade. I wanted the security they had. Our half-hour lunch turned into an hour before we had to pack up and walk out. Man, that was the most I've heard about God in my entire life, Grant McKee said as we marched single file along the trail. I was fired up. If you want, I'll go to church with you, I said. I felt closer to Jesus than I had since I was a child. Saving that ancient tree, that part of God's creation, had brought me closer to Christ, and I wanted to share it with my brothers. Grant and I made plans to go to Mass together in a few weeks when we both had time. It still bothers me that we never made it. Central Arizona lies in what is known as the Transition Zone, mountainous terrain that is bordered by dry Colorado Plateau to the north and wetter Basin and Range Province to the south. It borrows characteristics from both of these landscapes, steep terrain and spur ridges alternating with flat valleys. The dominant plant types are juniper, Turnabella oak, catclaw, acacia, and manzita. The combination of high ridges and level valleys makes the weather across the terrain look highly local and variable. Conditions can change quickly in a relatively small area. Every summer, usually in late June, a change occurs in the weather over central Arizona. Wet, colder air moves up from Mexico and pushes out the warmer, drier air that's lain over the land all spring. In that meeting of cold and warm air, thunderstorms form, and as they get bigger, they draw in the heat that's building up over the early summer. Then they go roaming over the high desert, dropping rain. In terms of wind, thunderstorms produce a range of effects: microbursts, gust fronts, outflows. Every part of the country gets thunderstorms, but in the Southwest they have a special significance. They can turn a gentle, meandering blaze into a blowtorch. A storm during monsoon season is a double-edged sword, either helpful or hurtful depending on one factor: moisture. A wet thunderstorm can bring pounding rains which cool off fires and even put them out completely, but a dry thunderstorm pushes strong